Hello and very welcome to H 1872 of the 19th of October. We will continue with Wittgenstein on the impossibility of following a rule only once by Francis Lin. Förra gången på 1870.
Why are you speaking Swedish?
Oh, förlåt. Excuse me. Last time, 1870, we went through the criterion for correctness, and that those are lying in the interactive status, not the private language idea of mind being a sort of a correctness giver or a reflector. We have previously mentioned this as the mirror idea, that there is some res cogitans, a mirroring substance, mirroring all the words and all the thoughts, checking them, putting them into order, deciding things. And that thing is the private language. There is no possibility for that sort of inner criterion of truthfulness or correctness. There need to be proper criterions, actual doings. My colleague Carl Lundahl was very kind to add the parrot example. The act of hitting the parrot, maybe that's a bit grotesque, but at least touching the parrot can be decidable whether the parrot is dead or alive. It's a criterion, it's a sort of doing, an act. So what do acts do? Well, in contrast to the reductionist idea, truth and falsehood, are not things simply out there or in there. They are the things that we do with things. You can compare it with trying out a bicycle. Only the doing can tell to what degree it works. And the same goes for the propositions, the ideas, the intentions, the emotions, knowledge. It is done. No disconnected mind can tell if a bicycle is working or not, or actually even the abstract things. What is an original, or is there any truthfulness to the scientific propositions? They are all tried out by a human being or human beings. And of course, all this is happening in the life world, the shared communal life world. All of what has happened and all what is to happen are deeply involved in this. So I'll continue, and now we are at page 139, the second paragraph, and we begin a new subchapter. Direct interpretations of the not one person once remark. Genet or Ginet is one of the earliest to discuss the not one person once remark. In detail, he aims to see what truth and falsity is in it. In other words, he wants to know whether it is possible for a rule to be followed by only one person only once. For this purpose, he devises 3 thought experiments. A chimp's inventing a gesture of beckoning, a bear forming a little mound of stones with an intended meaning, and a creature's sudden uttering an English sentence with meaning after being struck by lightning. Genet suggests that these 3 scenarios are possible, and argues that if they do represent real possibilities, then they show that it is possible that there should have been just one occasion in the history of the universe when someone meant something by an utterance, and of course obeyed a rule in doing so. Since Ginet's examples aim to show that the not one person once remark is untrue, we must scrutinize them. I shall only focus on the beer example, since it is representative. In the world Genet imagines, there was a solitary bear who caught fish, and picked fruit, and who sometimes store them in holes for later consumption. Initially, the bear did not distinguish between fish holes and the fruit holes. So she often dug the wrong holes and failed to get what she wanted. One day, after putting some fish in a hole, she collected a number of stones and formed a little mound on top of the hole. As soon as she finished doing this, the world blew up. Now, since the bear only did the mound forming once, can we say that she followed the rule, put a little mound of stones on the food hole, only if you intend thereby to get yourself in the future to think that there is fish in that hole? According to Genet, the story so far does not allow us to answer the question positively. So he adds more things to the story, these being certain counterfactual conditions that were true of the bear at the time of her forming a mound of stones. For instance, that had she continued to exist, she would have put more little mounds on fish holes, and only on them, that she would have dug holes with such mounds on them when she wanted fish, and the other holes when she wanted fruit. Genet supposes that these counterfactual conditionals were true in the virtue of the bear's physical and mental states at the time in question, which Genet calls dispositions. If the bear had all these dispositions, then we can say Genet thinks that she followed the aforementioned rule. Genet's example of the bear is thought-provoking. But his explanation in terms of dispositions is troublesome. Brücke discusses some problems with a disposition-based account. I shall discuss another problem with it later. There are two additional problems with Genet's interpretation. One is that it intends to make the not one person once remark false. Rather than trying to see that it might be a grammatical truism. So it does not solve the truth puzzle. The other problem is that it does not solve the motivation puzzle. Even if the not one person once remark were false, why would Wittgenstein want to put it forward? Genet might want to say that Wittgenstein does not realize that it is false. Even if that were true, it would still not explain why Wittgenstein wants to stress that rule following is not a one-off. Colin McKim gives an impressive, in-depth analysis of PI 199, in which the not one person once remark is made, and also some related remarks by Wittgenstein. His interpretation of Wittgenstein's thoughts on rule following is rather convoluted. So we must inspect it carefully if we want to see whether it has any problems. According to McGinn, Wittgenstein's main idea on rule following is the multiple application thesis, which McGinn thinks is most clearly expressed in the two paragraphs which are versions of PI 199, but also PI 204. This gives rise to a problem which I shall discuss in a moment. But first, let us see what the multiple application thesis means. The content of this thesis is best expressed in McGinn's own words. Let us recall what precisely the thesis is. It is not one, the very strong thesis that each rule someone grasps must be obeyed by him on more than one occasion. Nor is it, too, the weaker claim that there are some rules such that they must be multiply obeyed. As it might be the primitive or fundamental rules which spawn the potentially idle rule. It is rather three, the comparatively weak thesis that there must be some rules which are multiply obeyed if a person is to grasp any. Not necessarily the same set of rules for each person. And this was from McGinn, Wittgenstein on meaning. To put it a simpler way, the multiple application thesis is that rules can be grasped only if they are actually obeyed more than one on one occasion. Apart from giving a joint interpretation for PI 199 and PI 204, McGinn also interprets PI 199 separately. Recall that PI 199 states that the not one person, one's thesis McGinn does not give a name to this thesis, but he thinks that the thesis is ambiguously stated between A, the claim that each individual who grasps a rule must obey it on more than one occasion, and B, the weaker claim that there must be many occasions of rule following, possibly distributed over several individuals. The later claim would allow as possible the circumstance that each of many people obey a given rule only once. Since this would be enough for the rule to be followed on many occasions. Rather. And he thinks that Wittgenstein is only committed to the weaker thesis.
Weaker.
Softer, weaker. Now there's a problem with McGinn's interpretation. Which I hinted at a moment ago. The problem is that the multiple application thesis and the not one person, one thesis are not identical. From McGinn's explanations above, we see that the strong versions of both theses, that is 1 and A, are the same. Both saying that each individual who grasps a rule must follow it more than once. But the weaker version of these two theses, that is 3 and B, are different. This complex relationship between the two theses looks very strange. How can the strong versions be the same while the weaker versions different? Maybe McGinn would say that the strong versions are wrong anyway, and that it is the weaker versions which count. But in that case, Wittgenstein would have put forward two theses, that is 3 and B. What is the relationship between them then? McGinn contends that 3 and B are logically compatible. Even if these two theses are logically compatible, why does Wittgenstein want to advance them both? It seems that McGinn has trapped himself in a muddle. Muddling. Muddling on. Things get worse still. Having explicated the meaning of the multiple application thesis, McGinn goes on to argue that the thesis is not in fact true. And for this, he puts forward the subtraction argument. Although the subtraction argument is against the multiple application thesis, McGinn, in fact, uses it to argue against the not one person once thesis. So in his opinion, the not one person once thesis does not stand either. He also thinks that the two theses which he finds questionable should be detached from the rest of Wittgenstein's work. From the above explication, we can see that McGinn sets up the multiple application thesis and gives it an interpretation that is free, and also gives an interpretation to the not one person once thesis, that is B, only to argue that these two theses are wrong. If these theses are wrong, then why does Wittgenstein put them forward? It might be thought that Wittgenstein does not realize that they are wrong. So this would still not explain Wittgenstein's motivation for advancing them. So McGinn's interpretation cannot solve the motivation puzzle or the truth puzzle. Four, indirect interpretations of the not one person once remark. In the preceding section, we saw two attempts at directly interpreting the not one person once remark. Hooray! In this section, I shall analyze some indirect interpretations of it, which divide into two further categories: the community view and the individualist view. For one, the community view. The community view states that a person who has been isolated since birth cannot follow a rule. Different holders of this view provide different reasons for this. There's a huge literature on analyzing, supporting, or criticizing this view. And it is not a place to review this literature here. What I want to do is to examine the community view critically from the grammatical viewpoint. In the first place, the community view is controversial, for it has been fiercely contested. Does everyone who understands and uses the words to follow a rule agree to the statement that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule? The answer is obviously no. For the individualists obviously disagree. For this reason, the statement cannot be a grammatical one in Wittgenstein's sense, and it would be problematic to attribute the community view to Wittgenstein. The second problem with the community view, which is most important for the present paper, is that it does not explain the truth of the not one person once remark. Oh no.
Oj, oj, oj. Oj, oj. Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger here, definitely. The community view states that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule.
The community view states that a person in complete isolation cannot.
It entails that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule once, or twice, or 3 times, etc. But the not one person once remark is different. It only says that a person cannot follow a rule only once. But it does not specify that the person must be in complete isolation. And it leaves open the possibility that the person brought up in a community cannot follow a rule only once either. In other words, what the not one person once remarks says seem to be this: a person cannot follow a rule only once, no matter whether he has been in complete isolation or has grown up in a community. The community view holders might want to say that a person in the not one person once remark really means a person in complete isolation. But virtually no arguments for this have been put forward. Even if it could somehow be established that Wittgenstein means to say that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule once, what would be the motivation behind saying this? Why would he stress not once? Why would it be insufficient for him to say that just a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule? Thus, the community view seems to explain neither the truth puzzle nor the motivation puzzle.
Motivation puzzle. Puzzle.
The holders of the community view, in fact, have made attempts to explain the not once issue, although they seem not to have realized this. In addition to thinking that rule following is possible only in a community, they also hold that it has regularity as an essential component. For instance, and this is from Malcolm Wittgenstein on Language and Roots. But clearly, there must be some regularity in acting. This is one dimension of the concept of following a rule. And this is from von Savigny, self-conscious individual. The existence of a custom involves many people behaving very differently.
Regularly. Behaving very regularly.
Yes, indeed, regularly. Wittgenstein's point is that a rule or master pattern is such only from within a practice that is itself a kind of complex regularity, namely community regularity as expressed in agreement in action and judgments. Williams.
Judgment.
Williams.
Judgment.
Wittgenstein, Mind and Meaning, page 175. Since the concept of regularity entails not just once, if regularity is necessary for rule following, then it is impossible to follow a rule just once. Although Malcolm von Savigny and Williams do not explicitly draw this inference, I think that it is implicit in their minds. Now the appeal to regularity generates an awkward situation for the communitarians. If regularity can explain the not one person once remark, then why stick to the view that rule following must be social? In other words, isn't the notion of community redundant and unnecessary? This leads naturally to the individualist view of rule following, which I shall examine in the next subsection. Would be an excellent place for a pause. Subsection.
Subsection.
Fiction.
Section
1832.
page 11 in PDF. Page 11 PDF. Going downwards.
143.
Indeed.
I will put a little. Let's go to some comments here, and the text was rather dense. I'll go to page. See in a second here. We just passed through Gines and we went into Colin McGinn on page 140. And at the bottom, it's 3 paragraphs from the bottom, beginning with 2. To put it in a simpler way, the multiple application thesis is that rules can be grasped only if they or some of them are actually obeyed on more than one occasion. And this is from McGinn. These are, of course, texts, and different authors are incredibly hard to understand. And as you might have gathered by now, Francis Lin wants to specify the subject a bit more than Genet and Colin McGinn, and also others. I will here make use of fractality and what we learned of movement from Rolf Pfeiffer, the Swiss researcher into AI that has showed that remembering, thinking, planning, and by extension also emotion, intention, and meaning are all stemming from movement. And I think now you get a little hint. Think of a ballet dancer, and she is supposed to do one movement, a particular dance movement. That can be compared to establishing, as in the beer concept, the act of putting a mound on the hole where fish is saved. Would it be possible for the ballet dancer to perform a movement only once? And as you understand, it would not be at all possible. It needs to be trained over and over again. When we move, that is our thinking. It is just that we are simply not aware of it. And oddly enough, even the problematic ostensive definition by Augustine is a movement, a learned movement that takes time to learn, even to point. It is not as easy as it is once you learned it. It can also be helped to bring in what we learn from mathematics, that the figures are not simply out there, they need to be practiced, they need to be done for them to reinforce their meaning little by little for each time they are repeated, strengthening. I think I call this iteration the other day, to iterate. There will be no final destination for this meaning. It will grow for every time. Whereas McGinn and Genet are still having one foot in the Newtonian mechanical world, where there is either or. It looks for them on the surface that it would actually be possible to do a rule only once. And that is the mistaken belief that meaning is somewhere out there. It can easily be cherry-picked. You pick the meaning down from the celestial skies, and there you have it in your hand. And lo and behold, I had meaning only once. I made this little mound above the fish hole. And then the universe exploded, as Genet so comically put it. I will put in another example here to help expand the idea of this. We often mention the Norwegian coastline. Think of it as being developed through the years, decades, centuries, millennia, maybe millions of years. Those millions of years are, so to speak, stored in the shape, in the moving shape, because there is a movement in the Norwegian coastline, although it is on a geological time basis. It's a doing there at the bottom, and it's combined with all the different fractal dots going in, going out, going to the exterior, going to the interior, that builds the whole structure. That is partially or totally neglected. One could call that the past, if you like, not wholly correct. The communal, pre-made things. And that structure is very important. It's not done only once. It's taken centuries of repetition. If we jump a bit here and go to page 142, if you may, Kalle. And I think this is going to be a very nice point of entrance here. In the community view, I think that's a good way to think a community of an agglomeration of fractalities or doings that has been done, each and every person also participating in what has passed. The past is almost ever ignored. This is what Heidegger refers to Geschichte, what has taken place, in stark contrast to Historia, the verbal or known explicit story. Most of what happened, the Norwegian coastline for that matter, all of it is implicit. It will always remain implicit. And also remember the moving AI mobiles of Pfeiffer. He hasn't programmed them. There is hardly any explicitity. They all learn by implicit making. If we go to the third paragraph under the subtitle for 1, beginning with the second problem. The second problem with the community view, which is most important for the present paper, is that it does not explain the truth of the not one person once remark. The community view states that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule. It entails that a person in complete isolation cannot follow a rule once or twice or 3 times. That is not an exact understanding of the not one person once remark, because it says that a person cannot follow a rule only once, but it does not specify that the person must be in complete isolation. It leaves open the possibility that the person brought up in a community cannot follow a rule only once either. And I'd say, put in Augustine here, and then you will understand. We do not learn a word or a thing by pointing, the ostensive definition. Augustine himself spent a lot of time learning how to point when he was young. That's forgotten. And what also is forgotten is all the past complexities that make up and do the pointing. The pointing is also a movement. And these things we usually forget. And when we forget that, this is when this trouble starts. This is when we start to think that a rule can be once in a lifetime. And it has not really so much to do whether the person is in isolation or not. It has to do with just what it says. It cannot be done once. If we may go to page 143. We have some hinters here. And if we go to von Savigny, I think his expression there could be both useful and I think thank you very much. Very good. I think it could be useful as well as it's going to be explicated more clearly by Lin later on. I'll still use it. The existence of a custom involves many people behaving very regularly. And I don't think it has to be very regularly, but they participate in the same language game, playing the same game or play. And this is all implicit. Think of a lot of people, think of the mobiles, moving objects that were constructed by Pfeiffer, participate in something, almost like a dance. Which is actually not far from what they're doing when they're interacting. In this movement, one could say, oversimplified here now, sorry, you could say the rules are coming to become. When you played when you were young, when you were a toddler, in the sandbox, you did similar things or dissimilar to some extent, but slowly a rule established that you're not supposed to put the sand into the yellow bucket. It becomes a game. Something that Wittgenstein would refer to a primitive game. But this is here where it starts. The first hint of a regularity, if you like. And that takes time. By repetition, it becomes stronger. But the sandbox game will not be as strong as the game rules for mathematics or chess. It's down to how many times, how much history, how much past, how much adding of fractality, if you like. I hope this was helpful, but do mind everyone listening in here. This is a rather complex subject brought up by Francis Lin here. Give it some time. This needs to be repeated as well. Understanding does not come in one go. I recommend pondering it, and we will return to it in the next episode when we continue this. I was a bit unsure here whether my colleague wanted to add something or not. You're more than welcome.
Yes. Yes. Let me see.
Do not feel pressed, Kalle.
Okay, let me see. Bear, since I like animals, I want to comment on the episode with the animals. Let me use the example with the bear. To give it some context, I would like to return to a previous paper that we discussed in age 1827. It was the paper by Goldfarb on the fixity of meaning. Goldfarb, fixity of meaning.
Very good.
And I could quote here from Austin, page 86 in Goldfarb's
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
If Austin writes, if we had made sure that is a goldfinch, you can think about goldfinch, Goldfarb.
Yeah, good.
Finch,
I like that.
Finch, fixity of meaning, because the name of the paper by Goldfarb is fixity of meaning. So goldfinch, and a real goldfinch, yeah. And then in the future does something outrageous, explodes, quotes Mrs. Wolf or whatnot. We don't say we were wrong to say it was a goldfinch. We don't know what to say. Words literally fail us. Suppose that I live in harmony and friendship for 4 years with a cat. Meow. And then it delivers a Philip pig. We ask ourselves, perhaps is it a real cat? Or is it not a real cat? Either it is or is it not, but we cannot tell which. Actually, that is not so. Neither is it a real cat, nor it is not a real cat. It's the facts. Which is designed for other situations than this one. You could not say the former of something which delivers Philippics, nor yet the latter of something which has behaved as this has for 4 years. Ordinary language breaks down in extraordinary cases. Austin continues, no doubt an ideal language would not break down whatever happens. In physics, for example, our language is tightened up. Goldfarb comments, here Wittgenstein would disagree, I think, correctly.
Yeah.
So there is this reference to physics, and this is classical physics. And Austin believes that there is an ideal language, but this is the ideal language is that of classical physics. In classical physics, in quantum physics, things can break down.
Yeah, definitely. They most often do as well. Well, not often, I would say, but they do.
So if we compare this with the beer example from today, so I think this very phrase here that mentioned by Gide.
It's very good, yeah. Yeah, it's very good, yeah.
It implies that there is actually possibility of a beer having a meaning. But I don't think it depends what you mean with the intended meaning. It's I think that bears work in like in what was the other professor, Garfield and his empty mind.
Yeah.
Bears don't have meanings; they only do things.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, is already a misconception that they have meanings. And let me see about the solitary bear who got fish and picked fruit and who sometimes stored them in holes for later consumption. Initially, the bear did not distinguish between fish holes and fruit holes, so she often dug the wrong holes and failed to get what she wanted. One day, after putting some fish in a hole, she collected a number of stones and formed a little mound on the top of the hole. As soon as she finished doing this, the world blew up. Now, since the bear only did the mound forming once, can we say that she followed a rule, put a little mound of stones on a food hole, only if you intend thereby to get yourself in the future to think that there is a fish in that hole. I think this whole scenario is absurd.
Yeah, it's definitely absurd, but it had some, for me at least, it had some convincing thing. First I read it, I said, well, it will be sort of a primitive rule there. But once you start going over it again and again and deepen it, it becomes very absurd.
Mm, mm. So
Becomes
everything.
almost crazy.
So I think there's how do they reason? It's like we all in one paper we also discussed apes. Unfortunately, I don't anymore remember. I don't know if it was Goldfarb. I don't think it was in this one. And dogs. And was the, oh, I don't remember now, but I think there is an illusion that is as Wittgenstein says that even if a lion were able to speak, we would not are able to understand him. So I think it was
No,
applies
they only
to theirs.
speak clearly in Alice in Wonderland.
So did she follow a rule? No, I don't know. Did she really follow a rule? I don't know. It's the whole idea is absurd. There is if you.
Yeah, for one thing.
But in one quantum physics, you can, so to say, create your own reality, but it doesn't mean that it's a new rule every time. So we have to get rid of this fixity of meaning that actually the world is, in quantum physics, the world is new every time. Every
Yeah.
day is a new way. So there are no fixed, even classic, having laws in universe are not fixed, as we know from the two misters, the Harvard professor.
Roberto Unger and Lee Smolin, yeah. And the quantum physical experiments are never repetition of the same thing. Each experiment is unique. So you can say that the laws of the universe are actually implicit, non-explicable.
So even rules can be only done once. Would you agree? In quantum physics, you can follow each rule only once because the conditions always change.
Yeah, it's correct, but it has a bit more complexity to it. But there are no explicit rules like in classical physics. But there are, of course, the third variety that Wittgenstein refers to, which is the implicit rule, non-explainable and not exterior rules, so to speak, which is very different. And it's an eternity of difference, I would say, to using what Smolin used in one of his books. It is an unimaginable difference between explicit rules and implicit rules.
Yes, indeed. So in classical physics, there are only explicit rules. Quantum physics more about implicitness.
Yeah, definitely. There are characters of explicit as well, but yeah, very good, Kalle. The general idea in classical physics is that everything is explainable. Everything is out there, and that follows suit. Very good with this article. Thank you, Kalle. That follows suit also that in classical physics you can follow a rule only once because there is nothing implicit. It simply doesn't exist.
Did I understand you correctly? So in classical physics, you follow the rules always you follow always rules.
That's the idea. That's the
Mm.
idea that there are explicit rules, and
that you
that the whole
always.
system is sort of always rule following, and they can only be followed once. There could, in certain cases, be a rule that is followed only once. Oddly enough.
You mean classical physics? What do you mean with this? In
Classical physics. Yeah.
And how is possible to follow only a rule once in classical physics?
It isn't. It
It
isn't.
is. Indeed. Then I agree. Then I agree. Absolutely. So in this case, quantum physics would agree with Wittgenstein that you follow a rule only once.
Yeah.
So for this bear, let's be generous to Gines. Let's say that the bear did follow a rule. If we say that the bear was like a human being.
Sure, yeah.
Rule, okay, then we can grant Gines was correct. But not that bears do actually think in our sense. But let's say that's what the bear was, like a human being. And then, okay, then we can grant that Gines was correct. But this is to give human semblances to Gines, to the bear.
To project human faculties to bear. Yeah, why not?
Okay, perhaps we should enter.
Yeah, it's the most difficult text. I think this is one of the most difficult texts we encountered in a long time. And do remember, this takes iteration, repetition to have an understanding. I would say 100% sure, if you get understanding directly, you haven't gotten it. Then you're stuck in this, so to speak, explicit understanding. So it's only good, it takes time. Thank you very much, Kalle, for bringing up Paul Goldfarb. I do like him, and I like the goldfinch.
And can we do an imitation of goldfinch and bear before we end?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know how to imitate a goldfinch, but we can perhaps imitate a bear sound, or bear, or imitate when bear says honey. Nami, 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 yummy, yummy, yummy.
Very good. Very good.
But the word blew up, and the bear didn't get his honey.
Yeah, great. Very good. Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, as usual. Fun and insightful comments. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Have a very pleasant day, morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. And bye-bye for now.